Hello, honor students. Today's video is about learning to lead, and it's one discussion that I think is very important, perhaps the single most important topic in the course. So I want to say in the beginning that you've all proven that you know how to learn. You wouldn't be in the Honors College if you weren't good at that. If you weren't good at taking tests, if you weren't competitive, if you weren't thorough in your preparation, all those things. So number one is I know you can learn. What I'd like to do is provide some suggestions, some guidelines, and try to cajole you into learning a little bit differently maybe than you're typically used to. I think learning about leadership is quite a bit different, not entirely different than many of the subject matter courses that you take at a university or in the Honors College. So you can learn organic chemistry or anatomy or various other hard subjects by memorizing and studying hard and taking tests and those kind of things. Learning to be a better leader is different. I think it requires multiple ways of learning, and I want to talk about that today. So you're proven leaders, and I want to encourage you to master the art of continuous improvement, continuously getting better as a leader. As we'll talk about during our class sessions, I think it took me a long time to get an appreciation of what real leadership is about. I probably didn't start thinking about it until I was in my early 40s, and it took a while to really understand how to be a better leader. So you have two written documents as backup. One is chapter 4 of the textbook of my manuscript on leadership. I'd like you to read that. I'd also like you to read my lecture notes on learning to lead. That's been uploaded to Canvas, and it's accessible to you. So you've got those two written documents, and then you have this short video, which I'm going to try to keep to about 10 to 12 minutes. We'll see if I'm successful. I'm often not. And I hope there's a high degree of overlap between the three, but I'll try not to repeat a lot today, but other than to emphasize some things that may be different in how you think about leadership, or some things that I really think you should pay some special attention to. So again, it's one of the most important topics of the course, and I really want you to do your best to get better, not just this semester, but well past this semester. So a few points of emphasis before I talk about the 8 strategies. I'm not going to go through all 8 of my ways to get better, but I want to emphasize a few things. First, please pay particular attention to the 3 leadership lessons that are on page 1 of my lecture notes. Those are the notes that are on Canvas called Learning to Lead. They're on page 1 of that. And I want to tell you or suggest to you that getting to be a better leader is a cumulative exercise, and it's an integrated exercise. That is, it isn't just about learning a topic or about being really good in one interpersonal relationship. It's a accumulation of a whole different set of skills and life experiences. So the first suggestion is the more you do, the more ways you try to learn, the better off you are. Now, you probably won't pick all 8 ways immediately. You'll pick some that you're most comfortable with, which is fine. That's the way to do it. But I just suggest that over time you add to the 8 ways, or to the ways that are easiest for you, and add new ones. And whatever you do, don't talk yourself out of getting different kinds of experiences. I'll give you one in just a couple minutes here that was brand new for me and turned out to be an incredibly important learning experience. So learning about leadership is different. I think you have to learn about it in lots of different ways, both thinking and watching and emulating and trying things out and all those sorts of things. So that's point 1 of emphasis. Point 2 is learning to lead is much different than the idea of winning something or coming in first. Now, I was a very competitive person, still am a very competitive person. I hated to lose. My kids often tell me that I wouldn't let them win even when they were little kids. I was a grown-up. I didn't think letting other people win was part of the way you teach people things. But I was probably overly competitive. I'm not particularly proud of that, but my kids love to give me a hard time about it, and that's legitimate. So I would suggest to you that you should never purposefully try to lose as you become, get in a career, as you move into adulthood, as you have a family, all those kind of things. That trying to lose is almost always a bad thing to do. Try to win, try to be the very best that you can, but realize a couple things. One is that winning can be seductive. That is, it can lead to hubris or arrogance. It can make you think that you know exactly how to do it. The problem with that in the human world is that each situation will have some differences to it. So you can do the exact same thing in a second circumstance that you did in a first circumstance, and it won't be successful. We had a great football coach here at ECU in about 2009 and 2010 named Skip Holtz. You probably have heard of him. Skip and Jen Holtz were really good people. We became friends with them. I think the world of them. But Skip had a formula for winning, and he certainly made it good at ECU. 2 back-to-back conference championships against some very good teams was not an easy thing to do at the time period at ECU. But he took that same formula down to University of South Florida, and football had changed a lot. Really good athletes didn't want to go to a school that was only going to score 10 points a game or 13. Well, Skip thought if you scored 13 points or 17 points and had a really good defense, you'd win a high percentage of your games. But he stopped getting the athletes. The really good athletes went to other schools where they would, like Central Florida, that would score 50 points a game or even more than that. So Skip learned the hard way, and he did make adjustments, that the same formula in different situations is often not going to work. And we all have to be careful to think that now we really know how to do it. And therefore we sometimes ignore how a situation can be a little bit different, but those little differences can determine whether you're good at it or not good at it. And then the second point about winning is that I think, as a general rule of my life, I probably learn more in those situations where I failed, I lost, I came in second or third, or I just didn't reach the goals that I wanted to reach. And that's a big lesson. I think when we don't do as well as we want, we should at least ask ourselves, well, why? Why did that happen? My own view is that as long as we are learning from those things that don't work out, then it's not a failure. May not reach the goals that you wanted, but you don't fail when you learn about yourself, about your teammates, about your organization, about whatever it is. So I want to emphasize that learning is much different than winning. And then another key point to emphasize is that the great leaders I've worked with, and we'll say more about this especially in session 4 and 5, people like Tom Ross at the University of North Carolina, Margaret Chase Smith, the senator, former Senator Smith, and other great leaders that I've worked with, always had multiple ways of doing things, multiple approaches, multiple organizational philosophies, multiple ways of dealing with their colleagues, multiple ways of teaching, multiple ways of understanding things. In other words, they had a great big tool bag, and they weren't hesitant to use different tools in different situations. Now, this is different than your values. I think we all have to have a few very strong values and live those values. But in terms of getting results and building a better organization, it takes a lot of different approaches. And I think the very best leaders that I've ever worked with understood that each situation is different, and that requires a multitude of ways of managing that situation. So I encourage you not to get locked into simple reasoning and simple thinking. Whenever I've done that in my career, I usually made some pretty big mistakes, and luckily I learned from a lot of those. So let me say a few words about four of my favorite ways of learning. And they shouldn't necessarily be your favorite ways, but they're ways that I had to learn a lot about and adjust my thinking as I had more experience. So I want to say just introduce and emphasize four ways of getting better. One is coaching. Secondly, people skills, or what is often called relational skills, how you relate to other people and how they relate to you. Getting in the arena. And then fourthly, reading, which I especially want to emphasize given the nature of our society today. So let me just say a few words about each one of those. Coaching may be my favorite. My best coach, my best teacher, my best mentor in my life was my dad. I don't say a lot about him in my book because I talk about other mentors during my professional life, but my father was a consummate teacher and a consummate coach. And I think he brought up his family from a coaching philosophy. That is, what do you need to do to get better? How do you need to think about the world? And he, more than anything else, my dad left me with the sense that wanting to get good coaching is extremely important, and that we should all look for coaches that know more than we do or have better experiences than we do, and learn from them. Ask them hundreds of questions if we can. Don't take for granted anything they say, but realize that because of their experiences or because of their knowledge or their skills, they have something to teach us. So when you read the other two written documents, I hope you pay attention to my little story in there somewhere, I don't know where it is, teaching my dad teaching me how to do something called punch bunting. If any of you played baseball, you will know something about punch bunting. If you want to know more about it, ask me in class, because that lesson is probably 65 years old or almost that old, and it still is with me almost every day because of what a critical lesson it was. I didn't want to learn to punch bunt, but my dad kind of kept leading me to understand it and got really good at it. And it was something that I enjoyed doing because it was kind of a lost art in baseball. You see it a little bit today, especially with Coach Godwin at ECU, but not very much. So my dad taught me an unbelievably good and valuable lesson, and that was, when you find a coach that is interested in you and is willing to be honest with you, stay with them, take advantage of them, get to know them, and take their advice. Most times it will be a good thing. Secondly, I want to talk just a second about people skills or relational skills. These are often the most difficult things we do in organizations, be they a student organization, a fraternity or sorority, or a big university, whatever it is. I had a friend back in my Oklahoma days, this was a long time ago, who I worked with for a long time period. We got to be good friends. I still communicate with him. But he would say frequently that he just loved his job if it weren't for the people problems. Well, people problems are the central part of leading an organization. People relationships, finding out ways to motivate other people, are probably the key to running a good organization. So in my view, you can't love your job but not like the people problems. I think you have to start by saying, I'm going to learn how to deal with people because they're going to make me successful, and I'm not going to worry about how difficult they can be, because we all run into maniacs in the workplace, and we have a discussion later on about toxicity in our organizations, which has to do with the jerks that sometimes we have to work with or somehow get involved with, and what we have to do sometimes in order to get rid of that toxicity. But you can't hate people and run a great organization. It just it doesn't work that way. So relational skills are extremely important. I always felt that when I hired a good person, it's not that every hire I made was a good person. We all make mistakes in hiring. But when I hired a good person, I had developed two fundamental beliefs. One was that they want to be respected, and secondly, they wanted to have some freedom to do their job. They wanted to be able to make a contribution to the organization. That's not going to happen about 90% of the time if the boss man, is telling them how to do their job or continuously intervening in their job. or orchestrating everything that they do about their job. I have some very negative stories about one person I worked for that roamed the halls every morning between 7:30 and 8:30, and it was usually with about 5 negative things to say about your organization. Man, that's a good way to ruin the whole day, if not the whole week, or not the whole month, is by the first thing people see in the morning are negative thoughts. In contrast to that, my philosophy was that you want to show people that you're behind them. I talk a lot in my book about being the blind side blocker, and we'll say more about that in our class sessions. So I think good teammates want to be respected, and they want to have a role. They want to have an important contribution. They want to know that when they exert energy for your organization or for you, that it's going to be valued by the leader. I'm always impressed by basketball teams, or I'm depressed by basketball teams which might have one great scorer who never passes. In almost every case over the course of the season, if you've got, no matter how skilled that athlete is, if you've got a great scorer and nobody else gets to have the ball or shoot the ball or whatever, you're not going to be very good over time. That is, the other players on the team are going to learn to sit there and watch because they don't have a role to play. It's that one person who thinks he's the whole team. It wasn't too long ago, about 5 years I'm going to say, maybe more, when the University of Oklahoma, where I was for 13 years, had just a really, really talented point guard whose name I'm forgetting right now. It doesn't matter. He's in the NBA. He's doing really well in the National Basketball Association, but he controlled the whole game. And in the beginning of the year, they were beating everybody because everybody was energized by how good this guy was. But as the year went on, nobody else was getting a chance to score, to make a contribution. They didn't feel their roles were respected. And at the end of the year, Oklahoma couldn't beat anybody. They were losing almost all of their games at the end of the year. I think they got in the NCAA tournament and won just one game. So over time, that your relational ability to put energy into your organization and to get everybody on board with making a contribution, I think is absolutely questioned. I think the first question that great leaders often ask is, what do I have to do to make my teammates successful? What do they need? What can I do more? What can I do better? Not to further my own interests, but to make their job a little easier, a little more open, a little more powerful. And when you do that, I think they'll do anything for you. I found that to be true almost all the time. Okay, two more quick things. I want to talk about being in the arena. Please read the quote by President Teddy Roosevelt. One of my favorite quotes, because it's not whether you win or lose. Often it's how hard you play the game, and how it's not the critic who counts, it's the person who's really trying to make a big difference. And I think if we all try new things out and then try to be as good as we possibly can, then ultimately we're going to succeed. My quick story is this. In 1984, I made the crazy decision while I was on the faculty at the University of Oklahoma to join the city council. I was asked by the mayor to fill a vacant seat, and I decided I would do that, and I ended up being on the council for almost 4 years. And a lot of my friends told me I was just simply crazy. And the reason for that is that being on the city council at the University of Oklahoma usually doesn't help you climb the ladder in being a faculty member. That is, you're not rewarded for doing things for the community. Luckily, I think ECU is a much different place than that, and I think a better place, because we do reward community service and other forms of service. But I got on the city council, and for almost the entire first year, I wasn't making much of a difference. That is, the other 8 council members, there were 9 of us in total, were not doing what I suggested we should do. They were doing other things. And so one day I went to the mayor, who became a really good friend of mine. His name is Dick Reynolds. And I said, Mayor, probably said, hey Dick, why aren't people listening to me? I think I've got something to contribute to the city council. He said, you do have something to contribute. But he looked at me straight in the eye and with a very fatherly look almost, and he said, Doctor, you have to learn to count to 9. And by that he meant there were 9 votes on the council. And if I couldn't get 4 other people to join me, it didn't matter how smart I was, how much I knew about public administration, whether I was a better speaker than all those other people. I had to find a way to convince 4 others that we should do part A rather than part B, or whatever the issue might have been. And that was seemed simple, but it was a valuable lesson to me, because I was used to doing what academicians do, which is to try to have a winning argument or a valid finding or bring the facts to bear and all those things. All that is still strategies I like, but they're not necessarily what 4 other councilmen would do. So you get in different arenas. If you get in a political, constituent-based arena like the city council, it is not going to operate like a university would operate. And at a very early age, I don't know how old I was, maybe late 30s, that was a really good lesson for me, and I paid a lot more attention to politics after that particular point. I will close this session with a brief discussion of reading. If I have any criticisms of your generation, I would simply, and I don't have many because I think you're much more capable than I was at that same age, but I would encourage you to do more reading of original sources and of the best experts. I think if you really want to know how things happened and why things worked the way they did, you have to do a lot of reading. I'm a little bit a buff of the founding of our country, because I think it was so unique. Don't think it's happened in any way similar in the history of the world. But in order to understand what the founding fathers, the Washingtons and Jeffersons and Madisons and Adams and Hamiltons, what they really thought, you have to do one of 2 things at some point, and hopefully early. You have to go back and read what they said, like the Hamilton papers, the Federalist Papers, and those kinds of things. Or you have to read the very best people, the people that have been recognized with Pulitzer Prizes or other awards for understanding what they thought. So if we really want to know what the founding fathers thought about the Second Amendment, often these days talked about only in terms of the right to bear arms, that was not what the founding fathers had to say. Now, whether bearing arms is a good thing or bad things, I won't address that right now. I will say this: if you want to read about the Second Amendment, you should read somebody like Joseph Ellis, E-L-L-I-S, who's a world-renowned historian of the Founding Fathers. And the phrase in the Second Amendment about forming a militia was absolutely central to the thinking of the Founding Fathers. They weren't talking about whether you and I can have a weapon. They were talking about whether states can have a well-regulated militia. That was their primary concern. Now, we've completely lost sight of that today, but if you want an honest interpretation of the Second Amendment, I suggest reading what people like Hamilton and especially James Madison had to say about it, and then historians like Joseph Ellis. You just can't get the truth about it unless you get back to those original documents. The same is true about the Civil War. I love to read about the Civil War, and when I go to Wikipedia and try to find out a battle, it's interesting how, and I use Wikipedia a lot because it provides a general introduction to topics, but if I read about the Battle of Shiloh in Wikipedia, it bears only a small resemblance to what the great historians say about the Battle of Shiloh. If you really want to read about Shiloh, you should read the 2 or 3 chapters that the great historian, Ron Chernow, wrote about it in his recent book on Grant. So I just think reading is almost becoming not a lost art, but it is so easy to read the short summaries like Wikipedia and numerous other ones, WebMD and dozens of others. And I understand why people go to those. I use them too. But going back to the original authors and to the great people that have really studied the question is a better way to get a fuller understanding of it. So those are my recommendations. I'll quit now. You have a lot of material. You have this 25-minute lecture. You have my lecture notes on Canvas, and you have chapter 4 of the book. And I hope you really pay attention to this idea of continuous improvement, the difficult art of getting better all the time. And we'll talk more about that in session 3 and I look forward to those discussions. Take care.